Okay guys, why am I calling this the ultimate guide to grip strength for Jiu Jitsu? I spent a lot of time looking at the research and looking at studies on grip strength to see the best ways of developing stronger grips, looking at the anatomy of the body, a lot of time working with clients and a lot of personal experience as well, testing out various methods for developing grip strength for Jiu Jitsu. I think that this video is so important because when I look at other videos and other exercises that are put out there, I think there are some really important things that have been missed in terms of the way that you tackle grip strength, and I think you have to have a logical approach and think about why you're doing what you're doing and the effect it's going to have. And there's going to be one exercise at the end of this video that I bet 95% of you watching this video, maybe more of you, are not doing this, yet it could have the greatest impact on your grip strength. So make sure you watch the entire video. And the other thing that's really important is the loading for these exercises. Based on the research and based on experience work with myself and with clients, if you don't have the correct loads for the exercises, you're not most optimally developing grip strength. And I think it's another thing that's really missed when it comes to developing grip strength for Jiu Jitsu. So let's get into it. Okay, let's talk about correctly loading grip strength exercises for the most optimal development of grip strength. I'm not saying that you should never go past these times. I do a lot of stuff working on a pull-up bar, hanging from a pull-up bar. But if we're talking about purely developing grip strength here, what the research tells us is that we want to be using loads anytime that we're holding on to something, whether it's holding something below below the body or alongside the body, or hanging off a pull-up bar. We want to be aiming for loads that are between 5 to 15 seconds and targeting that for 3 to 5 sets. So one set would be a hold of something between 5 to 15 seconds, and then you do that for 3 to 5 sets. And that's really important because first of all, the research tells us it's much more effective for developing grip strength as opposed to longer duration holds, say 30 to 45 or 60 seconds. That's more for grip strength endurance, which most people are going to get the majority of from their time on the mat. We're talking about strength here, absolute strength. So that's why it's important, first of all. And secondly, the reason that it's really important, when you look at the research on the loads that you need and the intensity of the holds that you need to have to develop the connective tissue through the body. So we're not talking about just developing contractile strength in the muscles, but developing the connective tissue, the tendons and ligaments and the fascia within the body. You need to have intensities that are between 5 and 15 seconds, because it's only when you have those high intensity loads do you most effectively develop the strength in the connective tissue. And when we think about, rock climbers, where they have incredibly strong grips, yes, they're muscular, but they don't have these massive forearms. And a lot of that grip strength comes from developing strength in the connective tissue. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but most importantly, you want to be thinking about, for grip strength, is looking at holds of 5 to 15 seconds for 3 to 5 sets. And that's missed in a lot of the videos you'll see, and keep that in mind when we're going through the rest of these exercises. And I'll call out when there are times that maybe you want to step away from that with the particular exercises that I show. So that's really important, guys. Make sure you pay attention to it. But now let's look at some of the exercises. Now, the first type of exercises that you want to be looking at for developing grip strength for Jiu Jitsu is what I call a closed grip. So wrapping your hand fully around an object and holding that for time. Now, that could be holding something like a kettlebell alongside your body. Maybe it's doing it with something like a farmer's walk, and that's really, really good. But the reason I'm standing in front of the pull-up bar is because I think hanging from a pull-up bar or from another object has a lot more effectiveness in terms of developing grip strength and some other overall benefits. And the reason for that is there's a lot of research and a lot of work that's been done, and Thomas Myers is one of the leaders in this, in his work with the myofascia that runs through the body and certain lines of force that are applied through the myofascia in certain areas. And one of them, that you have particular lines through the arm, and one of them, I think it's either the deep or the superficial back line is what he calls it, but it's a line that only gets activated through the arm and through the shoulder and through the upper part of the body when your arm is above your body in a hanging position. When your arms are down like by the side of you, you're not activating that same line. So in addition to developing grip strength from the pull-up bar, you're also developing the strength through that connective tissue that does have a lot of application for other pulling exercises. Plus on top of that, hanging from a pull-up bar is very, very good for you learning to keep the scapula in its correct position, activating the muscles through the upper back, and has a lot of positive impacts in terms of the elbow, shoulder health in general, on top of the grip strength. So that's why when you're doing closed hand holds, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, is that I think it's better if you can to do it hanging from an object. Ideally it's a pull-up bar. Now when we get into closed hand holds, there are predominantly two sets of muscles within the hand that dictate grip strength. When you close your hand fully, you're using a different set of muscles to when you just bend the fingers at the first knuckle. So we're going to talk about bending the fingers at the first knuckle a bit more later on. That's a really important part of the video that you have to watch. But in terms of the closed grip, I don't need to explain to you, I suppose, why this is so important for grip strength, right? Because grip strength is predominantly closing your hand around an object. But I would vary with, just holding on to a normal pull-up bar. And once you get into, past 15 seconds for 3 to 5 sets, we talked about, then either make it more difficult by maybe taking something like a fat grip, which you can see hanging up here on the board, or a thick bar that you may have access to, maybe a PVC pipe that goes over the pull-up bar. So you can either increase the intensity or the complexity of the exercise, or add more load over time. And it's not to say that, I personally spend several minutes over different sets hanging from a pull-up bar every single day. So hanging from a pull-up bar for longer than 15 seconds is still very, very good for you. And I still do that, and I still highly recommend it for all the benefits I talked about in terms of hangs. But if we're talking about grip strength, when I'm specifically, I'm working with a client or working myself, and I want to develop strength in my grips, it's 5 to 15 seconds. So you could put a dumbbell between your legs, you could have a weight belt that goes around your waist, you can go from 2 hands to 1 hand, but always try to stay within that 5 to 15 second range for 3 to 5 sets. But generally, to close this section out, a fully closed grip, and it doesn't matter what exercise you use. It could be climbing on a rope as well, hanging from a rope. There's different variations. So it's not so much about the exercise, but it's making sure that you're developing strength with a fully closed grip. Even some of the grippers that I use on and off, you're closing your grip in that respect. So think about that. Find exercises that you can use, ideally hanging from something, maybe a pull-up bar, for 5 to 15 seconds with a fully closed grip. That's the first focus area that you should look at when it comes to grip strength for Jiu Jitsu. Now let's look at some of the other exercises in some of the other areas. Okay, so we talked about, first of all, closed grip exercises as being the first area of focus for grip strength development for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And just a quick point that I'm showing you examples of exercises. As long as you cover the areas of the type of grip strength that I'm talking about, it doesn't matter what exercise you use. I'll give my advice and my ideas, but you want to be thinking about hitting those key areas. And it's good to have some variation there also in the type of exercises. But anyway, the next section, after we talked about having a fully closed grip, the next section is going to be either rotation or anti-rotation exercises for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the reason being is when we grip hold of someone, whether it's a wrist, whether it's a collar, whether it's a sleeve, it's not static. That person is trying to fight the grip. Or quite often, depending on the situation of the grip, if you're going for a lapel choke, you're trying to flex that wrist into someone's throat to try and get the choke. So we need to be able to be strong, not just in terms of holding on to the object, but fighting the rotation of the person trying to move, but quite often creating torque within our wrist as well. So these are two examples. I'm going to give you one example of a rotation strength exercise that I like to use, and then an anti-rotation strength exercise that I like to use. But again, these are examples. As long as you hit these areas with the correct loading that we talked about, that's what's important. So This is the Gripido trainer, and or officially just the Gripido, one of my favorite grip strength training tools. And as you can see, I've done a full review of this product, and maybe a link to that below, so I won't talk too much about it here. But with these blades on the Gripido, what I'm doing is rotating this all the way down as far as it will go, and then rotating it back the other way. And this is probably one of the examples and the exceptions of that 5 to 15 seconds, because this is not a loaded hold, I'm doing reps. So I'm just going to go as far down as I can one way and far down as I can the other way, and repeat that 3 to 5 times on each arm. So that's one great example. Other examples are doing getting a dowel with a string and a weight attached to it to roll the wrists up and down. Again, it's a rotational strength exercise for the wrist, and I think it's important. But one of my other favorite ones, and this is more of an anti-rotation exercise, is going to be, I call it the Viking hold. So I'm going to take a kettlebell and just hold it for time upside down, and then when I can get to about 15 seconds with a load, then I'm gonna adjust that load accordingly to make it more difficult for me. The Viking hold, really great exercise. So it's that anti-rotation, that ability to hold your wrist solid when you're holding on to someone. So these are two quick examples, and I referenced another one, but the most important thing to take from this is, if you want a complete picture of grip strength, complete development of grip strength for Jiu-Jitsu, then anti-rotation and rotational exercises need to be key for the reasons that I've discussed. So at the start of the video, when I said there's one set of exercises that 95% of people watching this video are probably not doing, this is what I'm talking about. And it's using something called a crimp grip. And this may not make any sense to you unless you're a rock climber, but I'll explain what I mean. And that's why I've got some of these little tools with me here. But before we get into that, I talked earlier about there's a difference in the muscles we use in our hand when we close our hand fully like this in the fist, versus bending at the first knuckle and keeping the fingers straight. So if we want to develop the most complete picture of grip strength for Jiu-Jitsu, it's very important that we work to develop strength through those muscles and through the fingers. It's very important that we work this kind of motion rather than just closing the hand fully around an object. And also strength in the fingers, all the connective tissue of the fingers, is going to be incredibly important for Jiu-Jitsu, because we do a lot of gripping just with the fingers in many positions, particularly in open guard, rather than just having a nice object that you can wrap your hand around entirely. And the other thing that goes on when you're placing loads through the tips of the fingers, the mechanical stress that's going through the fingers and going through the hands is going to be incredibly high, and therefore very intense. But intense is a good thing in this respect, because we talked about having the right intensity in loads to develop strength in the connective tissue, and that's what we're trying to do here. Because you see rock climbers who are athletes who have incredibly strong grips. They have muscular arms, but it's not massive forearms, because a lot of that strength is not coming from the contractile strength of the muscles, but from the strength through the connective tissue. And this is probably going to be one of the best ways for you to develop it. And like I said, it's called a crimp grip is what we're talking about here. So first of all, I'll talk about, this is crusher holds. I forget how long I've had these for, several years. But you want to get some kind of object where you can only really get the first part of your finger into that hold, and then with this one you can attach strings, and then I could put that maybe on top, attach it to a dumbbell or a kettlebell, and slowly build up. So I'm only holding on with the fingertips and maybe wrapping the thumb around that first knuckle. That's going to be probably the easiest and quickest if you can get hold of these, or maybe fashion some up yourself to develop the strength, develop a crimp grip type strength. And over time you can start putting these on a pull-up bar, and these are scalable as well. They go from deeper to narrower to narrower. But one of the best things that I've done, and you can just kind of see it in the background here, it's a little bit hard for me to get the camera in, but I'm gonna edit in a little clip real quick so you can see something I put up on Instagram recently. And what I've done with that setup there is just taken a piece of wood. This is about 3/4 of an inch deep, maybe, and then I've bolted that into the studs above the door frame, so there's a lot of support from it. And because we talked about hanging being so important for grip strength and overall health benefits and strength and conditioning benefits, I think that's one of the best things you can do, and over time, slowly but surely, add load to it. So it's not to train you to become a rock climber here. If you do rock climbing, it's fantastic for grips, obviously. But you're a Jiu Jitsu athlete, and this is, I think, one of the most beneficial things we can bring from the rock climbing world to really get a complete grip strength. And honest to God, I think this is going to be one of the most impactful types of exercises you should be adding to your grip strength training routine. And now, before we close the video out, I've just got one more section to talk about some supplemental exercises that don't neatly fall into some of the other categories that I've already talked about. Okay, to quickly close out this video, I want to talk about some supplemental areas that are very important to overall hand-wrist strength that have some application for developing grip strength, but the three other areas are going to be more important in terms of the absolute strength that you can apply with your grip. But I think these are some important supplemental areas that you can include on top of that. And I wanted this to be, like I said, an ultimate guide to grip strength for Jiu Jitsu. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about them. Now, the first thing is to do with, I'm not going to call it wrist strength per se, but wrist conditioning, let's call it that. It's an excellent wrist conditioning exercise, and I've got an entire video talking about wrist conditioning that I'm going to link to in the show notes below. And the reason I've started doing this exercise with clients and had great feedback from it is every single time I teach a mount class and I'm doing cross choke from mount, I guarantee that at least 50% of the class, and this can be right up through the belt level, talk about how uncomfortable and how difficult it is to maintain a good strong grip in the mount position and apply the choke. And what I would attribute that to is just the wrists are not conditioned to some of the demands for that position and other positions of Jiu Jitsu of creating that torque within the wrists to apply the choke. So one of my favorite exercises, I've got a foam roller, this one from my friends at Mobilitas. Make sure you check out the podcast with the owner, Scott, BJJ Strength podcast. But I'm going to get a gi and I'm going to wrap it around the foam roller. And when I'm doing a cross choke from mount, rarely will I have both palms facing up, but this is for a conditioning exercise. And then I'm torquing the wrists into the foam roller, and I'm trying to get this part of the blade into the side of the foam roller like it's someone's neck. So not to make this into a cross choke from mount video, because it's not. This is an excellent exercise for conditioning the wrists to that kind of movement. And I cover it in a lot more detail in a video that I'm going to link below, with a bunch of other exercises like wrist push-ups that are very, very good for conditioning the wrist and just overall wrist health and longevity, which I think is key for Jiu Jitsu. But it's not strictly grip strength, so I only want to refer to it very, very quickly in this video, but make sure you watch that one. The next area that I'm going to talk about is going to be the thumbs. And the thumbs, when we look at the way that grip strength is applied, is less important to grip strength than the fingers. Yes, it plays a role, but if you're doing a lot of hanging work, close grip hanging work, particularly with thick objects or thick bars, you're going to get some strength development in the thumb already. So I don't think it always needs to be isolated, but developing good strength in the thumb will help with grip strength. And it's also going to help just look after the hands, because you can get tweaks and pulls in the thumb when training Jiu-Jitsu. So it's another consideration as a supplemental exercise. Again, I've got the Gripedo trainer here, and this is a great tool for doing this, where I'm pinching with the hands, and it really isolates the thumb much more than just a closed grip hang. And then I would attach a weight to this and then pull it up off the ground. I've got a full video on this that I'll link to below, that you can watch that. Or you can get 2 weight plates and do some kind of pinch grips, a piece of wood that then you pinch with both hands and attach a weight to it on a string. So various different ways to develop grip strength and can make a really, really big difference. And then some of the other exercises that can be really interesting are going to be fingertip push-ups that are very good for conditioning the fingers and strengthening the fingers, and also wrapping rubber bands around the fingers and extending the fingers into that resistance, because all of this work that we've talked about here is about closing the grip. So it's important to balance stuff out that otherwise can cause a lot of problems with tendonitis. So it's another important supplemental exercise. I've got a separate video on that one as well, so I'm going to link to that in the show description, and I think that's going to be video description. That's going to be worthwhile for you to watch. But I don't want to make this too much of a video. And also because these exercises, they do have some impact on grip strength, but not as much as the other exercises that I've discussed. I wanted to keep this section shorter, but I also wanted to introduce you to these ideas. So guys, I hope you found this useful. I know it's a lot of information to throw your way, but what I want to ask you is, if you think that you would like to see a program that talks specifically about developing grip strength, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the video, but otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.